So my name is Boaz Nadav Manes. I'm the university librarian in Lehigh University Library. Do you hear me okay? Yes, good. With us today is Ellen Jones from
New School.
From the New School. And Jill Morris, that you see her image here, cannot make it today, but we're going to try to make our most out of this session. I am Lehigh. The library I'm in is one of the open source kind of advocates, leaders in the US. We do work with Folio, with Project ReShare that you'll hear about today, and CCLP. It's a collaborative collections lifecycle project that I'm very excited about. So what we are going to be talking about today is our roadmap towards a standard-based interlibrary loan. Main concept for all those projects, and definitely for ReShare, is to come up with ways by which interlibrary loan is standardized, scalable, open, and interoperable. Here is a code of conduct, if you haven't seen it before. So ReShare has grown significantly. You may know a little bit about its history. If you haven't, it's all now on our new website. Check it out. There's a lot of information on it. We basically have 30 member consortia and organizations, 170 plus implementers across 5 consortia, and 1.5 million requests processed this far. So this is pretty awesome in the last few years. Started 2019 onwards, and now we're here. The mission of our community is to set the standard for how libraries collaborate, partner, share resources, and connect patrons to the information they require by developing user-centered, standard-based, community-driven, and community-owned library technologies and tools. We take the community-owned piece very seriously, and that means that our communities that are spread around the participants have a lot of time that we're all spending on just doing this thing. Of course, I'm joking, we don't have time, and we do that on a volunteering basis, and all of it is based on people's expertise and their goodwill. But it's awesome. ReShare today is a modular platform for interoperable, unmediated resource sharing among libraries, connecting diverse ILSs with 3 main components: index, that is called reservoir; share discovery, we use viewfind, which is an optional because you can select different types of discovery layers. It's multi-tenant, cloud-based requesting fulfillment, and an open API-enabled system. Integration points, you see all of them. Again, core for ReShare is interoperability. So you can see all the integration points across different systems, and we want to make sure that this, is the way that we go about anything that we do, ReShare and beyond. We had this far 17 software releases. We have 5 consortial implementations. 13 library management systems are supported, and we have planned implementations of 3 more. Community governance for us, so I'm the chair of the communication and marketing team and a member of the steering committee. All of us in this work wear different hats. So some of us serve on the steering committee, some of us serve on the product team, some of us on the marketing team, and we have a funding team as well, because as you can imagine, this is a resource that needs additional funding, so we are looking at different opportunities to extend it. Values, important to us, and our guiding kind of light when we go about anything we do. We want to encourage trust, This is based, all of it is based on practitioners putting their time and their effort into a system. Obviously, we want to make sure that it's a system that they trust in the way that they see befitting. So we want to make sure that they have as much trust as you would have with anything you create. Community ownership. So we run the business together with Index Data. There's a lot of kind of partnership around like new leads, new things we'd like to kind of do together. Lots of mutual thinking about what we can do. And that's also, running like a business is great for a library. Sustainability and impact through innovation. Every few weeks, we have a new idea on new things that we'd love to do. All of it obviously meets some of the resource restrictions and all those other things that happen in an open source environment. So there is a lot of interest in innovation and sustainable one. And more, ReShare becoming an advocacy community. So thinking about CDL that we were very busy with, controlled digital lending, thinking about electronic digital sharing, thinking about interoperability. What does it mean across systems? Definitely, we talked about AI so often this Charleston. So think about how to use tools in a way that is responsible. So comprehensive suite of ReShare tools for digital lending. So this is what we'd love to have: community first, standard-based, interoperable and open, extends and expands ReShare, returnables, empowers libraries of all types and sizes to lend and borrow digital materials, modular, and improving the industry through advocacy. Advocacy standards are part of our advocacy efforts. We're all in this together. Those are our strategic digital directions. So we have returnable, continued development of returnables, controlled digital lending, a lot of effort with BLC, that is a member, the Boston Library Consortium, on thinking about workflows around those. We are looking for a community organizer to help us to sustain the community that is growing. So having a person that is dedicated to support and engage with the community on an ongoing basis is an urgent need for us. And the investment for this is 100% of product development by community members. So it doesn't go anywhere else. And part of the advocacy efforts are also talking about different systems and different things, ideas we'd like to be doing. So think about data interoperability, talks about metadata interoperability, new data points that we may think of as we're going about ReShare. Did I just do something? Okay. AI I just mentioned. CCLP is another project that I talked about earlier today. It's a collaborative collections lifecycle platform. You can imagine that a lot of the data that is gathered in a resource sharing system can be awesome to be used for a prospective collections system. So we're thinking about how to connect one system to another. We think that greater competition in the field is going to be just the right thing. So, we want to make sure that what we come up with is interoperable, increasing competition, increasing options and opportunities for suppliers as well as libraries. Greater value for our users and greater representation for our communities of practice. All right, is that you now?
I think it's me.
Oh. So Ellen is going to continue.
Hi, everybody. I apologize for my voice. I was in a presentation that didn't have a mic and blew out my voice, so I apologize for that. One of the things that the steering committee loves to do is a drinking game for pretty much every time I say the phrase 1866. it's kind of the core of what it is that we do. It's a messaging platform for requesting and supplying between libraries. We are a group that not only is using the actual protocol, but we are actually on the editing group as well as the implementers group within the International Standards Organization. So we are literally writing what we do. And so that it's that level of advocacy, it's that level of access to the next generation of the protocol that we're really trying to think about how we can actually change the industry. We change the industry by changing the standards to enable everybody to do these services, not just ReShare, but everyone. So you can see that there are a number of different conferences and presentations and things that we go to. Our vendor partner is Index Data. Index Data has been in the folio and open source development for, well, since the 90s, early 80s, whatever. Seb, if anybody doesn't know Seb was, Sebastian Hammer was one of the first people that actually worked on the Z3950 protocol, which we all know and love. And we all use every day, and none of us even think about it. You know, standards is literally part of the lifeblood of what it is that we do with ReShare. So the past 12 months within some of the ReShare development has actually been a lot of different, there's been a lot of different activity. We've worked on a community roadmap in terms of how we are planning on growing the community, how it is that we're planning on growing ReShare as a platform. We now have new membership models. There's an advocacy model. There's a consortium model. There's individual libraries can actually join. So there's a number of different levels of support that you can actually participate. I'm going to use a phrase that I don't know if everybody is familiar with. Has anybody ever heard of something called a platform cooperative? Okay, it's like the hair club for men, right? Not only are you a user, not only are you a member, but you're a user. Okay, so in that sense, you know, everybody that is using or implementing or leading or participating on any of these groups or any of these committees, we all have a stake. We are the stakeholders. And so for that, part of the reason that we put in a lot of time for this, and I said this before and I'll say this in this venue as well, I am probably one of the only library directors that actually has as part of my job description to work with vendors. I cannot emphasize enough that this is the work. It's not figuring out what you're going to do once you get it, because by then it's too late. You actually have to be involved in the development of what it is that you're using in one form or other. Otherwise, you get what you invest in. And if you're not investing time as well as money, you're to blame. It's a hard lesson, but having that level of vendor interactivity is an incredibly important part of actually participating and making the industry better as a whole, not just a particular product or not just a particular vendor. So participate in the vendor communities, participate in these types of cooperatives, because the only way that people are going to know what your user story is if you participate in it. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now. I do want to talk a little bit about CDL because it's actually the core of what it is that we've been doing with ReShare Digital. And he's not here right now, but Charlie Barlow has been an absolute mensch when it comes to the support of ReShare, when it comes to controlled digital lending. Controlled digital lending in many ways has actually allowed us to leapfrog in some of the different types of infrastructure and architecture that we've been able to then begin looking at and thinking about non-returnables, ebook ILO, and other things I'm going to be talking a little bit about. You're going to see that there's a report that's actually going to be issued about ReShare CDL. It should have come out in late October, but this is available on BLC's website. I heartily recommend reading it. This is actually the output of the IMLS grant that they received, as far as not only creating the technical infrastructure of what it was that they're doing, but also creating kind of the social infrastructure in terms of what it is that the consortium actually needed in order to do this. They were looking at two different models. One model was basically a library digitizing a material. The other is actually creating a digitization lab that everybody would send something to in kind of a star hub type of a model. And so I heartily recommend reading that. Now, the community actually voted on stuff, and one of the things that was interesting as part of this participation was actually looking at how difficult it was actually going to be to develop some of this based on the CDL infrastructure that we had already built within ReShare. I know CDL are probably three letters people don't want to hear right now, especially in light of the Second Circuit Court decision. We can talk about how to interpret that after the session. But one of the things that it enabled us to do is actually this type of an infrastructure allowed us to then begin building non-returnables on top of the stuff that we were doing with returnables. You'll see that one of the things, and surprisingly enough, one of the things that the membership wanted was tokenized ebooks before book chapters or scan requests or even articles. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the models that we're actually looking at, what our development process is going to be, and then walk you through a little bit of some of the screenshots and other things that that are coming on down the pike. So the initial development phase, we are going to be, we've actually done a lot of functional requirements. I'm thinking about this in terms of FSDs, but functional requirements documents. As far as what this is going to look like, I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the findings were that we had with our subject matter experts. We're actually going to be working with a vendor to actually do tokenized URLs in early 2025. Based on some of the work that we did with non-returnables. The other really big shout out that I want to give is to Minitex. Minitex joined ReShare in 2024, and they one of the requirements that they had with non-returnables was they needed to exchange URLs so that their patrons could actually download things. Well, that turned into tokenized URLs for ebooks. And so we were able to actually leapfrog some of the development because some of what we needed to do for scan requests could actually be used for tokenized URLs. So after that, we're gonna look at the digitizing of book chapters and embedding different types of scan requests in the interface. So just so that people can get a kind of roadmap, Boaz talked a little bit about this, just in terms of where we are with returnables. So this slide should have been hidden, but whatever. Okay, so unfortunately, the slide is actually a little small, but you can see here that one of the things that we're starting with is a blank request form here. As of version 1.16, this is already live. People can actually submit a request into ReShare. And there are two different types of requests in 18626. I'm going to say it a lot, so drink. There are loans and there are copies. Loans basically are your fixed monograph type of material. Copies are basically things that don't have a return trip. So when you think about this in terms of, returnables, that's us doing the loan part of 18626. Now that we're doing non-returnables, we're actually getting into the copy pieces of this. And obviously, there are a whole bunch of different types of characteristics that weren't part of loans. For example, book chapter metadata and the like. And we're looking at different ways of doing that from the discovery perspective. We decided to focus specifically on the delivery part first, and then we'll begin thinking about what this looks like in Viewfind for discovery as far as separate book chapter book chapter results and other types of things. Once the user actually inputs something, they get a copyright screen. One of the consortia that are actually going to be coming up is an Australian consortia, so they have a different copyright set of laws. So we needed to be able to be adaptable to different types of international copyright law. But once the user agrees to it, they submit the request. This request will actually match against a bibliographic record that's in our shared index. The supplier actually gets it. They get a pull slip, basically. This could either be an article, it could be a book chapter, whatever. If they have the book, they can actually say they expect to supply the material. If not, they can basically cancel it and move on to the next supplier in the rota. When it comes to time to supply it, unfortunately, like I said, at the very bottom, you'll see that there's a URL there. Minitex is, depending on the different types of file transfer delivery methods, some are actually using article exchange, some are using FTP, some are using HTTP. There's one group that's actually using Google Drive. So, but the point was that to have something that was simple, that was open enough to begin starting to think about what the non-returnable train would actually look like. We'd have our set of requests. Once the document was filled, it would basically be completed, and then we would close the request out. So here are the delivery methods that we're expecting to support. I already talked a little bit about the URL and Haiku. Well, I'll talk about Haiku in a second. When it comes to Odyssey, we are planning to support the Odyssey protocol when it comes to working with Iliad. Article exchange, which is already in production, as well as supporting email. Ironically enough, the community goal was work with Iliad. And, I think that almost 80% of our subject matter experts had said work with Iliad in one form or other. So even though many have actually gone to either different types of methods, the really big schools, the University of Chicago's, the NYU's, many of these larger ILL installations are using Iliad as kind of their engine to supply. So getting it to work with Odyssey is a critical part of actually building the success for ReShare. We actually have a My Account section now. We've been looking at different ways of putting in different CDL URLs within My Account, as well as links to external document storage. We also have a request history, and then obviously after a certain number of days or a certain number of downloads, the links to that particular item go away. So as I said, here was the community vote as far as where it is that the priorities landed. And let me talk a little bit now about the different types of ebook ILL that we're actually thinking about. Another way of talking about EILL, and this is the dirty secret, it's CDL from a vendor side. Except instead of a barcode, they're sequestering a license. But it's literally the exact same thing. So we're going to talk about ebook ILL or vendor CDL. There are some that are DRM free, right? This is basically we have a right to send the whole book, and that whole book, that PDF. We have tokenized URLs. A tokenized URL is basically a token that's good for 2 weeks. You send the token to the requester opens it, they have that access for two weeks or however long it is, and then access from the token is actually rescinded. There is another type of ebook ILL that's about getting access to centrally housed or centrally managed ebook collections. In this case, we have different vendors who actually have given us access to this collection, but as simultaneous users. But instead of using the vendor platform, we're actually looking to use Haiku, which is an open access or open source digital repository where we've included the CDL logic to manage the sessions so that access is only given to one or two users depending on how many licenses for that particular item that we have. And then finally, the other reason that we're using the URL field is there are things in other people's digital asset management systems that we may want to get access to. And in those cases, those particular providers will issue a tokenized URL. We'll get that and we'll supply it to the requester. So ebook ILL is not just one thing. It's actually a number of different services. And thinking about what this looks like from the delivery side has been what we've basically been doing for the last 6 months. Now, one of the things that we heard from patrons want to know what options or what offers they're going to get. They want to know if they can get it in a PDF. They want to know if they can get it as, they want to know how long they can have access to the ebook. They also want to know how long they can have it for. So knowing the loan terms, knowing things like format, knowing that they'll be able to download it to a phone, these are all critical aspects that when you're doing that offer that's being made for ebook ILL, they need to know this information up front. So a lot of this information was some of the functional requirements gathering that we've been doing over the last 6 months. So as I said, here are some of the feedbacks from the subject matter experts. They also want to know if they have it in PDF or EPUB. So, okay. So all that said, there's the, we've been working with Library Futures on principles of digital ownership and what that actually looks like. Given kind of the state of controlled digital lending and where it is right now, or where it isn't, depending on how you read the Second Circuit decision, we believe that Access Services needs to get more involved in acquisitions than it ever has before. And one of those ways to potentially do that is to begin thinking about models of library-owned material as opposed to material that's actually licensed or that has restrictions. Restrictions on who you can lend to, restrictions of how long you can lend, as well as in what formats and on whose platforms. So as we begin thinking about this, we need to take an access services perspective on licensing and acquisitions, much more so than we have in the past. So here are some of the other features and things that we're actually thinking about in terms of ebook ILL. Certainly chapter listings and chapter discovery, those are things that we could easily take out of 505. I love that we're all talking about AI and this, that, and everything else. I like my AI dumb. And what I mean by that is I want my AI basically to tell me if I have an issue or not. I don't want it to generate text for an essay or this, that, or whatever. I want the algorithm to tell me, based on my holdings, do I have this? And if not, I don't want my ILL librarian say I can't supply it. I want to automate that. So those types of use cases where you're looking at text-based strings in an 866, that is completely ripe for artificial intelligence to be able to solve. And those are the things that we should actually be trying to solve rather than these bigger kind of shiny bubble or silver balls that we're all trying to chase. So as we begin thinking about these really narrow types of tasks that AI or LLMs may be able to solve, I would say, particularly when it comes to this type of low impact, okay, if we had the issue, then somebody had to, then the next person got it. Not a huge impact in terms of nobody's going to die over it, or nobody's going to be cited for any kind of academic integrity. So there are some really simple types of use cases when it comes to AI that can actually be applied to these types of access services scenarios that we should truly be exploring. And this is where I think that ReShare is different than what's going on in a lot of other spaces right now. Okay, so let's switch gears for a second. We're not going to talk about AI anymore. We're not going to talk about CDO. We're not going to talk about all the things we can't talk about. We're going to talk about cross-consortial lending. This is basically where we can't find it in one particular group. We're actually going to send the request over to another group. Now, again, I am going to talk about 1866 because I have to. What this is called in 18626 speak is called a transfer request. A transfer request basically means you send that request over to the supplying network. You have to be a member of both networks in order to manage and see the access of that and the progress of that particular request. Part of what we're looking at with ReShare is, do we really have to do that? Can there actually be a social contract between networks that would allow me to have bidirectional updates of that request in the 5 or 10% of stuff that we can't fill? So when you start thinking about this, if these can be done with social contracts as opposed to technology, then we might be able to manage our fill rates, or lower the things that we can't actually supply to people. And so we're looking at a standard that's kind of in addition to 18626, or version 2027, whatever it is, that would allow a network, once you go end of rota, once you can't find a supplier in your local network, to send it over to another network that could potentially supply it. Now, we're not just doing this in ReShare. We're actually bringing this to the ISO working group so that all the vendors who are participating in that particular group can actually agree, this is the way we're going to do this. Because again, we're all about advocacy. We're all about doing this as a standard. We don't want to solve this problem ourselves. We want to solve this problem with Clarivate. We want to solve this problem with EBSCO. We want to solve this problem with OCLC so that we can basically have what effectively is a national network of interlibrary lending, an open network. So when we look at some of this, this is actually some of the types of requirements that places like Trove in the National Library of Australia are already asking us to do. And so as we begin thinking about these types of, not just groups, but groups talking to groups, libraries talking to groups, and all of these different types of things, do people know what a ROTA actually is? It's a list of libraries that can basically, you go from one library to the next and see if they have the book. So you go from a list of institutions to a list of groups. That's the idea. So not only do we want to change 18626, but I also want to change 15511. This protocol, or I'm sorry, not protocol, this standard is also known as ISIL, the International Standard for libraries. It is a national non-vendor standard that actually talks about or gives a symbol to your library. It's a holding symbol. What we want to do, because it's so focused right now on physical addresses, is we want to webify it. We want to put all of our 18626 endpoints for all of our participating networks in the response of that ISIL symbol, so that things like deflections, this is what I'm willing to lend, this is what I'm not willing to lend, can actually be part of this response. Luckily, this standard is up for revision next year, and I was just at the Royal Danish Library, and we were actually talking a little bit about how cool it would be if we could actually have an open standard of networks for this particular type of, to enable this type of communication across groups. So with 15511, as well as 18626, there's a whole bunch of new functionality that we're thinking about introducing into the protocol. Some of that includes things like direct fee and fine payment, not only telling you where the what the amount is. If you know what a conditional is, a conditional basically says, I'm willing to spend $35 for it. Harvard tells me it's going to be $50 for us to scan this. Do you want it? So that's what a conditional basically is. It's kind of a messaging protocol back and forth between a supplier and a requester. We want to be able to also say, here's where you pay that $50. Okay, so including that type of account information right in the protocol will allow us to enable much more frequent and much faster fulfillment rates. The other thing it'll also allow us to do is kill direct invoicing between libraries, which is something that's always been a pain point for ILL librarians trying to, whoever's had a supplier that they then have to register as a vendor in their institution so that they can cut them a $50 check. That kind of stuff is crazy, but it's still slowing down our fulfillment. So this is a point of friction. Thinking about an extension framework, we currently have an extension framework that's based on NSIP, and I know I'm throwing a whole bunch of alphabet soup at everybody, but one of the things we'd like to do is not have to wait for a major revision of the protocol to introduce a lot of these new different services. And so this type of extension framework will allow people who agree to have the same types of extensions in their messages to begin testing out this functionality. There are always new digital lending use cases when it comes to some of the ebook ILL stuff that I was talking about, as well as some of the different types of, there are different types of mobile technologies as well as mobile DRMs that are going to have to be supported. When somebody asks for an ILL of an ebook and they want a mobile copy, not only are you going to need to know, what the title is, what the format of the file is, you're also going to have to know what type of encryption it is. You're also going to have to know a whole other host of problems that we didn't have in order to support mobile. We now have to have, and that has to be included in the protocol. Otherwise, none of us will be able to support phone-based downloads of ebooks between suppliers and requesters. And so this type of messaging is the stuff that we're talking about. And I know this sounds really boring. I know it sounds really dry. It's part of the reason that I love it as much as I do, because very few people actually want to talk about it. I already talked about the Open Directory framework as well as the network-to-network comms. Another thing that we're looking at is something called forwarding, where if I'm a Rapido customer, for example, and I want to send something to ReShare, I could potentially have a ReShare node. So one of the things that's a really basic concept of 18626 drink is that you have to have a requester, you have to have a supplier, right? So one of the advancements is to talk about groups. Another one is to talk about, I'm this person in this particular network, I'm this person in this other network, and I actually want to process all of my stuff in Alma. I don't want to process my stuff. I don't want to process my ReShare stuff in ReShare. I don't want to process my Alma stuff in Alma. And to require you to actually use a particular piece of software just because the supplier is using it from that network. So what forwarding will allow you to do is it'll allow you to natively process those requests within your request software of choice. So these are some really important advancements that we're looking at within the 18626 specification. And as I said, then there's the network stuff. Now, Boaz and others have made fun of me as far as what this is called, but we call it WeShare. And what we mean by this basically is that we recognize that we're not going to be able to get everything, but we have a bunch of friends that could potentially get it for us. And the question is, there are access services requirements, there are also technology requirements in figuring out how to do this. So what we want to do is we want to be able to begin thinking about what are the social problems for this? Not necessarily, what are the social and the business problems? The tech, we can totally solve. The social stuff, maybe not so much. So we're going to begin kind of thinking about and pushing some of this stuff. And some of these questions that come out are things like, how do you communicate between two networks when something is shipped?
Alan, we got a minute.
What's that?
We got a minute.
We got 1 minute. Okay. Well, anyway, there are other types of things like what happens when one partner overuses the other partner or abuses them. So there's a lot of different questions that still have to get solved. Obviously, we're going to do this when it comes to, we're going to use open standards to do this. And if this is something that you're interested in, certainly you can participate in it. And these are some of the ways to participate in it. Okay, fine. We've got a minute. I apologize for going on so long. I know I threw a lot at everybody, but any questions?